remember this like it was yesterday. My sister and I took our very young cousins out for a girls' day of fun. My cousins were growing up in Chicago's Austin community at that time, so we thought we'd take them to what amounted to really just being across the street to the suburb of Oak Park. My sister and I decided to take the girls to see some of the Frank Lloyd Wright homes in the area. And as we began to tour the blocks of suburban Oak Park with its big stately homes and its well-manicured lawns, the younger of my two cousins turned to me and asked a question. She wanted to know why this neighborhood in Oak Park didn't look anything like her West Side neighborhood of Austin. That's when the older of the two turned to her and said, because Black people don't live here. Now, of course, my cousins were very small girls at this time, still in elementary school. And to be sure, Black people do live in Oak Park. But what about that idea? Are Chicago neighborhoods with mostly Black populations like Austin or Auburn Gresham less pristine, or there's some sort of unfortunate coincidence? Or do they become that way by inherent design? So much so that when I say the South and West Sides of Chicago, you already know who and what I mean without me having to say anything else. Want to help us work through those questions and several others is today's very special guest. Before I get to her, though, I should say that I'm Sylvia Snowden. I'm a very proud employee here at KNTV, and I'm thrilled to welcome to the program Nedra Sims Fears, CEO of the Greater Chatham Initiative. Hello, Nedra.
Hello, Sylvia. Thanks so much for having me.
It is our great pleasure to have you here. Now, I know that you are very busy, so we certainly appreciate you making the time. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Good. So I did just want to start by letting you give a little bit of your background in the area of homes and real estate here in the city of Chicago. What does she know about the work you've done?
As Executive Director of the Greater Chatham Initiative, we focus on 4 communities, Avalon Park, Auburn Gresham, Chatham, and Greater Grand Crossing. And so I've been the Executive Director for 5 years, which is when the program started. And the purpose of it is to really look at the micro markets, what makes our 4 communities unique among the 77 communities in Chicago. And so we hired DePaul University, their Institute of Housing Studies, to do a report on what properties sell in our community, how much they sell for, how many properties get sold, who the buyers are. And so that gives us a front row seat of who is buying in our neighborhood and what those prices are. And so we can definitely say that our properties are have, let's say, lower status. Let's use that term. And so with that lower status, we have lower prices. And so we document that all day and all night.
Okay, and what did you do before you started work with the Greater Chatham Initiative? Tell us about some of the other things you were into.
Okay, well, I was reared in Chatham. My mother was a teacher. My father was a foreman at Ford. I went to Neal Elementary School, went to Kenwood, loved the neighborhood. It was akin to Black Disney World, as far as I'm concerned, growing up in the 70s, and it prepared me to go to Cornell and Northwestern and Harvard. So I got a great education. People really were my boosters, and I decided that I wanted to head up the Greater Chatham Initiative because I wanted other families to live in a neighborhood that had a positive Black experience. And I came through that because I've been in housing finance, housing development, economic development all my life. Is one of my passions. And so I wanted to combine my boosterism of housing and getting housing prices up because that's what our families deserve. And also merging economic development, getting people to get jobs, middle skilled jobs that pay living wages that can support families.
Okay, so what about what I said at the top of the show about my cousins? Do the South and West Sides of Chicago exist in their current states purely because Black people live there?
I would say that your relative was on point. It's not as though Black neighborhoods were built. I have a similar story that one of my white colleagues shared with me, that they're Jewish, and they've left Chicago maybe 2 generations ago. And so they were kicking it around one Saturday, and the grandparents said, "Let me take you back to our old neighborhood." And so they drive around Austin, um, and the white grandchildren were really confused, and they looked at their grandparents and said, "Did you used to be Black?" I mean, so to the notion that they can't conceive that a formerly Black neighborhood used to be a white neighborhood, that they would make them guess that maybe their grandparents were Black, and 50 years ago, makes you realize how racially segregated our communities are. I think there's another colleague of mine that really said it in a very academic way, but just as important, that because Black people are deemed to be of less value, then our properties are of less value. And it's not that we are intrinsically um, different in our mind's eye, but compared to our white peers, we are. And when you think about it, if they moved out of these white communities, because my parents were one of the first Black families to move into Chatham, and so the housing prices were the housing prices. But then when Black people move in, the housing prices drop. And it's not because Black people want to be paid less for the house that they just bought from white people, but it's because the appraisers um, are have that institutional bias where they will not value Black homes at the same rate as white homes. And that's been well documented.
Yeah, and let's talk about that some, because when I was growing up, I used to hear all the times that our neighborhoods didn't look as pristine as white neighborhoods because we didn't take care of our property. And if we took better care of our neighborhoods, they would look much better. But as I was researching for this project, I heard a lot about this term redlining. And I was hoping that you'd be willing to explain to viewers what that means when we say redlining. What are we talking about?
So redlining literally was a red line, a pen, a marker that insurance companies and banks and the federal government use. And they would draw lines around, we now call them BIPOC, but back then, Black and brown areas, and say, you don't lend there because we don't make loans to Black and brown people. And so literally it was a red line. That's where the term began. But the racist institutional legacy continues to this day. There's an interesting stat that the average Black family in America home equity, single family house, is $100,000. The average white family home equity is a half a million, $500,000. So as I said, it's not as if they built these communities for Black people. We moved into the neighborhoods. If you drive through Chicago, we are a city of bungalows, and the neighborhoods really look very much the same. The only difference is that, and I think of my sister who did the folded map project, is that if you're south of Madison, your property value is going to be much less than it is if you are north of Madison Avenue in Chicago.
And now, how does that practice of redlining really impact the South and West Sides in terms of the neighborhood? What does that sort of stigma do to a community?
So right now, people are looking at equity and what does an equitable landscape look like. And I think that's really important because using that stats that I had earlier, the average Black homeowner has $100,000 equity, and the average white homeowner has a $500,000. So I want to open a business. I want to send my kids to school. I want to rehab my house. I have 20% of the wealth of my white counterpart. So therefore, when And I think of it as like a dog chasing its tail. People will say to you, "Oh, go out and start your own business. Use your income. Use your assets." Well, my assets are a fifth less than yours. Then therefore I have a fifth left to start with. So I don't have money that I can tap into to go out and buy, go out and start my business. And if I'm having a yard party with my neighbors, I can't talk to, Mr. Smith across the way, and the judge across the street and the principal down the block because we all have the same $100,000 equity line access. But if I go to that same white neighborhood and they all have a $500,000, I'm much more likely to be able to raise $200,000 because they have it. Where in our communities we don't have it. And that is the structural barrier that Black and Brown people face when they go and want to create generational wealth, whether it's starting that business, sending your kids to school, paying off your student debt. It is a inequitable framework in which we live.
Okay, now redlining was outlawed several decades ago by President Johnson, but I know you said that it is still happening in your explanation. Talk a little bit more about that. How are we still seeing it?
So I think of what another scholar said, that we might have run the war, but the South won the peace. And when I say the peace, you think of Jim Crow laws, where separate was not equal. And that kind of bravado, that my neighborhood has to be better than your neighborhood, and I'm going to make it better by making sure that you pay higher taxes than your white counterpart, that we're going to underfund your parks and your schools, so there's this inherent inequity that we found. So one of Sylvia, you talked about growing up in Chatham, and one of our Chatham neighbors, their family actually sued and got the covenants removed back in the day in the 50s and the 60s. And I have a deed from another property that says no Blacks and no Jews. So you couldn't buy the property because the codicil on the estate deed says that you could not sell to Blacks and Jews. And so when they went and got that overturned, just because you made it legal didn't change the cultural framework in which white people will not live with Black people. We see this over and over and over again. When a Black person moves into a community, when that community hits a 30% tipping point, the white people leave. I don't care whether it's 1950 or 2015, that is the reality. You see that with the resegregation of the South suburbs. And then you sit there and say the neighborhoods changed. Well, the neighborhood changed because the wealth left. Because not only do you see that with the redlining, but you see that in the pay. The average Black woman gets paid 64 cents on the dollar of their white man. And it doesn't matter whether you have that doctor behind your name or that high school diploma behind your name. You're going to get 64 cents. And when you get paid 64 cents, what is your household going to look like if you're missing a third of your paycheck?
And I want to explore that further, really in the area of home loans, frankly. Because that, we talked a lot about what happened in the 50s and the 60s up through today. Let's talk about home loans today. And I understand that in between 2012 and 2018, nearly 70% of dollars loaned for housing purchases in Chicago neighborhoods went to white neighborhoods, a majority white neighborhoods, where just 8.1% of all of those loans went to Black neighborhoods. Why can't Black folks get those loans today?
Well, again, it's the institutional bias that we have in the banking community, unfortunately. You asked, previously I used to be a banker. I work for Fannie Mae, the secondary mortgage lending entity. I have helped finance over $1 billion of housing financing in Chicago and in the Midwest. And so we, in the 80s and the 90s and today we have all these programs for um, Black people for low down payment assistance, which is needed because, again, where would you be if you were missing a third of your paycheck? And so people don't have the kind of financing for down payment to put 20% down. But also, as you say, most people, how do they get their 20% down? They get it from their parents, from that $500,000 in equity that they have sitting around. But our parents don't have that $500,000 equity. And so we have to save our money. And we save it and we buy our houses, but the appraisers come out and they deem that our properties are worth less. And that is just systematic structural racism. I recently had my house appraised. You would think with someone who's been in the business that I wouldn't have to undergo the structural racism, but it's because it's so endemic in the neighborhood. Everyone who's Black in a Black neighborhood is gets the same results.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. I want to ask too, though, what the impact of that is generationally, right? If you can't get the sort of loan that you like to buy the sort of house that you like, what happens to Black folks over time?
What happens is that not only does kind of our white institutions, our banks, our credit unions, our savings and loans don't give us the mortgages that we need. And so what happens with when that occurs is that a basic, well balanced neighborhood, you're supposed to be able to buy a house, fix it up, and it equals the appraised value. In white communities, that happens all day long. That same neighborhoods that you talked about, where 88% of the lending happen, that occurs, that you can actually buy a house, the family can get their $500,000 out of it. The other family can come in and make it all HGTV cute with the new kitchens and baths and the spotlighting and the landscaping, and it will appraise out. But in our community, oh no, that does not happen. That right now, we're at such a imbalance that if you buy the property and you fix it up, like what I recently did, I bought a $3,000 square foot, 4 square building that used to be lived in by Ernie Banks, beautiful house. And I bought it, and the rehab value and the purchase price did not appraise, which meant that it was, and what did they say? Well, obviously the house can't be worth what the people are selling it for. You go back and you make sure that you get them to reduce the price so that you can get the money that you need to rehab it. So they want me to take the generational wealth that this family that has owned this property for 15 years and say, oh, no, 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 no. You can't have that equity. No, in order for me to get the equity that I need, I have to take the equity from you and say, your house isn't worth that because the banks say your house isn't worth that.
So I want to stop there for a second because I'm so curious on this point. I'm sure that in 2022, no lender will come out and say, well, we don't give money to Black people.
Oh, that's true.
You can't say that.
They just give less money.
Right. So I was going to ask,
right.
What do they do or what do they say if they don't say that?
Right. They just say that the house isn't worth it. Oh, you must be confused. Your house isn't worth this. And your neighbors must be confused because their house isn't worth that either. And so what happens is that it leads to disinvestment by Black people because you're always doing this analysis in your head. I can't put in too much because it won't appraise out and I'll never get my money back. And so therefore, I'm always looking at, well, as I say to people, I can't afford to put fancy things in my house, but it will never appraise out. So I'm always looking at second tier things to put in my house because I don't want to be upside down, which means I owe more money than what I can get paid for it.
Okay, and I don't want to be vague here. When we're talking about lending institutions, we're talking about banks a lot of people have heard of, like Chase or Bank of America or Wells Fargo. And I think that's fascinating because these banks do have branches in Black communities. They are doing business with Black folks. So is the concern then that, or at least part of the concern, that these banks come into Black communities and make money or accumulate wealth off of the money that we put in those banks and then turn around and take that wealth and put it in white communities instead of investing it back with us when it comes to home loans? Is that part of the concern?
Sylvia, your arithmetic couldn't be better. Your math is on point because what they'll also say is that it takes as much money for me to make a mortgage of $500,000 as it does to make a mortgage of $200,000. And so if I am a bank and I get points, I'm going to go to the white neighborhood where I can get that $500,000 loan because it's easier. I don't have to guess whether or not it's going to appraise out because it is going to appraise out. And if something looks a little funky, then I'm going to overlook it because, you know, Jerry and Susan, they're really nice people, and they're going to have everything work out for them because they're really nice people and they live in a nice neighborhood.
And, and I want to address this too, because growing up again, I used to hear all the time that Black folks didn't have good credit.
And that is not true.
But I used to that was why we couldn't get loans because our credit was so bad. So
we couldn't get loans because no one would give us loans. That the history of Chatham is that most Black people, because of the redlining, could not get loans. And so they had to get seller financing where they would, the seller would give them the mortgage. And if you missed one payment, they would take back the loans. So they had predatory lending in the 50s and in the 60s and in the 70s. So it was not that we didn't have the credit. They wouldn't give us the credit. As one of my community members say, white people are genius at extracting wealth from Black communities. They are less genius at putting in wealth into Black communities.
And so then it's completely possible for people watching at home for you to be a Black person with a 750 credit score, 800 credit score, and still find yourself having this problem we're describing, correct?
Correct, because it is institutional and it's geographic focused. It doesn't matter that you have a perfect credit score. It doesn't matter that you have money in the bank. Your house is going to be less. So you're going to accumulate less equity. And that is where the institutional racism comes in because you are a tall poppy and you will always get beat down and be made consistent with your neighbors because your neighborhood is considered low status, which translates into lower values.
And you know what else I found fascinating as I was working on this project? That this problem over time has not gotten better, it's gotten worse, which is really counterintuitive to the things that we think about racial inequity in the United States. Oh, it was bad in the 30s and 40s and 50s, but we've made so much progress today. It's worse today. The gulf in loans is wider today. Can you explain that to people?
So I would say that it's worse because it's the concentration of wealth, right? That we have these mega banks, institutions, and now everything is an algorithm. You know, it's like, well, I didn't do that appraisal. I didn't underwrite your loan. The algorithm that, you know, these people put together underwrote your loan. So we were in our heyday in Chatham when we had our 4 Black banks. We had Seaway Self-Help Credit. We had, I'm trying to think of the other one, Illinois Service Federal, and we had 2 other banks. When you have Black people lending to other Black people. They understand the neighborhoods. They understand the submarkets that, the block on 77th Street may perform and look very different than the block on 89th Street, or Stony Island may be very different than Vincennes, or it could be the same. But they understand the nuances, they understand the neighborhood, they understand the people. And when we had Black institutions that were interested in loaning to us, and that was their mission, that is when we had a renaissance of lending. We are the only community, Chatham, in the city of Chicago that has a mid-century housing district. And why is that? Because the Black banks lent to Black families, and they hired Black architecture, and they wanted to recreate what they saw on the West Coast. So it is no secret that when you have people where their interests and your interests align, you're going to get synergy. But when my interest doesn't align with your interest, where you get paid more to make money for a sure thing on the Gold Coast or in Lincoln Park, that's where you're going to put your dollars at. And we just get the also rans.
I want to go back to something you said a few moments ago about what happened with your own home. You said an appraiser came in and told you it wasn't worth what you knew it was worth. Do appraisers have that sort of power? Like, is someone just deputized to come in and tell you how much your home is worth and just that's the end?
Oh yeah, they're certainly deputized to do that, and that's one of the things that really infuriates me and really makes me understand the institutional racism that the status of being in a low status neighborhood is that appraisers do come in who are from the outside. They don't know the neighborhood. They don't know you. And they'll simply say, this is what it's worth. And I can sit, and I did, give them all the comps in the world to say, here, why don't you use these comps? And it's like, oh no, we only can look at comps within 5 miles, but I'm going to go to the comps that have the very lowest appraised values to use. And when you ask them why, it's like, well, why not? And it's like, well, how about I find the comps from the highest value properties? It's like, oh no, we can't use those. Why? We just can't.
So an appraiser can come in and tell you, and lowball you essentially, and you have no recourse.
We have no recourse. And so that's why there are there's a couple of housing organizations that are gathering data to really use so that we can have a lawsuit against this institutional racism, because it is not about my house, it's about our neighborhoods and that causality between low status and low value, and we have to break that. And you can't look to the banks to do it because they're vested. I mean, they were brought up and reared and taught. I mean, I have an MBA in finance from Northwestern. I was a banker for a long time. I worked for Fannie Mae, who makes the laws for the secondary market that buys those mortgages. So I understand the group thing. But we have to break the cycle if we are going to create generational wealth and not keep taking money out of the Black community and making sure that we are always sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Well, as we begin to wind down here, I have to then ask you, do the South and West sides of Chicago, considering everything we've just said, look the way they look because we don't have any money? Or do we not have any money because of the way the South and West sides of Chicago look?
We don't have the money because the appraised values are not there. and people are reluctant to overinvest in their communities. In white communities, you can make your house HGTV worthy, and everyone gives you a pat on the back. In a black community, it's like, oh, girl, you better not put in that marble, because you may not get, you may um, see yourself underwater, and it may take you years, if not decades, to see your housing value appreciate. And so it is what you said is how we are perceived, and that perception is the reality that the financial industry creates.
I don't want this to be a doom and gloom segment
Mm-hmm.
where, where people leave feeling dejected that there's just no hope for us to ever have these very pristine, lovely, picturesque, safe neighborhoods like other folks have. So what, in your many years of experience, can we do? I heard you talk about the power of having black banks, or perhaps having black appraisers. What do you think we can do to make things different so we can achieve some equity in our homes and some improvement in our neighborhoods?
Well, I think it's a it's a variety of different approaches. So I think that we just have to really deal with the institutional racism. There's no pretty way to sugarcoat that. It is what it is, and that has to be changed. That's fundamental. But I see people moving into Chatham, Avalon Park, Auburn, Gresham, Greater Grand Crossing all the time. It is still, even though it is a kind of low status, if you will, it didn't change the lovely fabric of the community that we have beautiful bungalows and Georgians, and Cape Cod houses. We have great housing, that's affordable. We have good schools. We have lovely retail developments where you can go shopping. We have good transportation. So all those things that made an attractive white neighborhood made an attractive black neighborhood. And that is why we see people coming to buy. One of the things that happened during the pandemic is that people, let's say you had $250,000 and you could buy a two-bedroom condo in Bronzeville, or you could buy a $250,000 bungalow in Chatham. People got out of those condos in Bronzeville and bought the house in Chatham because they needed more space and a backyard to stretch out with, and to live fully. And so we see people who are priced out of Woodlawn and Hyde Park and Bronzeville come and buy lovely houses in Chatham. We see people return from the suburbs. You know, the grass, is it greener grass? Maybe yes, maybe no. And so many people decide that the grass is greener in Chatham and Avalon Park, and then they come back. And so the other thing that I want to say is that we did see an interesting phenomenon in Auburn Gresham. As I said, every year we do a state of Greater Chatham where we look at all the houses and multifamily buildings, what sold, why they sold, who it sold to. And for the very first time last year, Auburn Gresham housing prices increased 25% more than the other neighborhoods. And I believe that is because people signaled, and the signals came from one, the Chicago Prize. Um, um, Carlos Nelson, who's on my board, is also president of the Greater Auburn Development Corporation, and he won a $10 million prize to help improve Auburn Gresham. And he also got monies from the city of Chicago Invest Southwest. And to me, that signaled to other people that there is investment going on here. And so people said, oh, let's follow where the money is, where monies are being investment. So investment matters, the signal. So I'm very enthusiastic about the Obama Presidential Center. It is the largest investment on the South Side since the Columbian exhibition in the 1890s. and you can see where housing prices are going up. They were going up before the Obama Center turned one shovel of dirt this summer. And so I believe that when people see investment going in, the Obama Presidential Center, the Tiger Woods Golf Course, for us on the east side of the expressway, we have Walmart, who just rebuilt Walmart, put in a health center, and has now a customer service center. We saw another Fortune 100 company, Discover, buy Target at 87 and Cottage Grove and turn that into a customer service center where they've hired 200 Black women, predominantly, going to hire another 400, and will hire another 600. We saw Seaway Self-Help Credit reinvest in the bank and make 75% of the former building available for a co-working space. We see the investment in Brown Park, where Microsoft is going to make it the first smart park in the Midwest. We have where the Gift of Hope is taking over the former Providence Bank and making that their City of Chicago headquarters. And then we have the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership, where they just created a workforce center. So all of that totals at least $100 million. So the investment is going on in the South Side. And as we tell that story, I think that you will see more people continue to come and take advantage of, again, as I said, the beautiful housing stock, the great schools, the transportation, and the retail shopping that is here.
Okay, and with that, Nedra Sims Fears, we thank you for being today's very special guest. We appreciate your time.
Sylvia, my pleasure. Thank you for all that you do.
Of course, we do our very best at KNTV to bring everybody what's really happening here in Chicago. And to everybody at home, I have to thank you too for making the time to tune into this very special presentation. I encourage you to hang out with us. There's a lot more to come on Red Lines, Black Lives. Thank you and have a fantastic rest of the day.